When Leah stepped off the boat into the warm glow of a Thai beach town, she expected peace, maybe even healing. What she didn't expect were the strangers who smiled too perfectly, a guest house owner who changed her answers with the tides, or the chilling phrase whispered by every local when she asked about leaving, "No one really does." Now, as memories begin to slip and reality twists into something she no longer recognizes, one question remains. Was coming here her decision, or someone else's plan? The sky had just begun its descent into that burnt orange hue as Leah leaned over the railing of the small boat, the breeze teasing her curls as the beach town of Ao Kem slowly revealed itself on the horizon. It was supposed to be a last-minute solo trip, a way to disconnect after losing her job and breaking off a 5-year relationship. She wanted silence, beauty, something untouched by Western tourism. Ao Kem was described in an obscure backpacking blog as a place time forgot, where the sand feels like silk and strangers become family. But no matter how many locals she'd asked in Bangkok or Phuket, none seemed to acknowledge it with enthusiasm. Some would glance away, muttering excuses. One old ferry operator had warned her softly in broken English, "Foreign people go, not come back." She had laughed it off. Now, as the boat docked, her laughter felt out of place. A group of locals waited at the pier, not with fanfare, but with stiff smiles and watchful eyes. No one spoke English, not really, but they seemed to know her name. A handwritten sign read Leah. A tall, elderly woman with braided silver hair and a red shawl stepped forward. "You stay with Mei Li," she said, her voice low and warm. "We know." As Leah walked through the village with her duffel bag, she noticed something strange. There were no children. Everyone seemed older than 30. Some foreigners waved at her from rickety cafes and seaside massage huts, all of them sun-kissed and oddly tranquil. Not a hint of chaos, not a raised voice. It felt too quiet. Her guest house sat atop a slope overlooking the sea. Mei Li's place was cozy, wooden, adorned with orchids and soft music playing from nowhere. The woman handed her a coconut with a straw already in it and a note with her room key. "You rest now," she said. "Dreams will guide you." That night, as Leah sat on her small balcony, the ocean whispering below and a warm breeze brushing her skin, she felt almost high. A sense of surreal calm wrapped around her. But then, at 2:17 a.m., a soft tapping echoed at her window. She pulled the curtain back and saw nothing but trees swaying. When she turned back around, the coconut was gone. Morning in Ao Kem arrived with golden light filtering through banana leaves and the scent of lemongrass drifting in the air. Leah woke to the sound of soft chanting from somewhere far below the guesthouse, a low hum that made the wooden floor vibrate ever so slightly. Downstairs, Mei Li had already set out breakfast: sliced mango, sticky rice, and a teacup filled with something floral and opaque. "Good dreams?" Mei Li asked with that same eerie calmness in her eyes. Leah nodded automatically, though she didn't remember sleeping at all. She had flickers, visions of hands reaching out of the sea, someone whispering her name from the jungle, and eyes, glowing, colorless eyes, watching her from the trees. Shaking it off, she dressed and stepped out into the town to explore. The village was beautiful, almost unnaturally so. The streets were swept clean, flowers bloomed in seemingly perfect patterns along fences, and the air smelled like jasmine at every turn. The people smiled, always smiled. There were no cars, just scooters and bicycles, and no noise beyond the occasional gong or wave. As she wandered, she noticed something odd. The foreigners she met didn't seem like tourists, they behaved more like residents, yet none spoke of where they were from. There was Gregory, a South African man in his 60s who ran a smoothie bar and claimed he'd stopped counting years. Elena, a tattooed woman who taught beach yoga and would pause mid-sentence as if forgetting what she was saying. A couple named Max and Iris operated a bookshop filled with old travel journals and faded maps, though neither could remember when they'd opened it. Leah's attempts to ask about the outside world were subtly deflected. "Where are you from originally?" she asked Elena. The woman blinked, smiled, and said, "From here, now." Everyone answered like that. It wasn't just vague, it was evasive. When Leah pulled out her phone to scroll through social media, she found that none of her apps worked. No Wi-Fi, no signal. Even when she tried switching SIM cards at a tiny electronics store, The young man behind the counter only smiled and said, "Not needed here." That evening, back at the guest house, Mei Li invited Leah to dinner along with a few of the other foreigners. They sat on mats under woven lanterns, eating curried fish and sipping something fermented from clay pots. The conversation was dreamy and slow, like everyone had taken a sedative. At one point, Gregory turned to Leah and said, "It's easier once you stop trying to remember." She laughed nervously. "Remember what?" His smile twitched slightly. "Anything." When the dinner ended, Mei Li gave each guest a small red flower, pressing it into their palms. "For dreams," she said. Leah watched as the others closed their eyes and held the flowers to their chests in unison, like a ritual. The next morning, she found that the book she'd brought, her favorite travelogue, dog-eared and marked, was gone from her bag. In its place was a worn paperback titled Echoes of the Shore, Collected Memories from A.O. Chem, with a note inside the front cover in shaky handwriting, "If you forget too much, read this." Leah flipped through its pages. They were filled with eerie entries, scrawled in multiple handwritings, all referencing feelings of déjà vu, disappearing time, and memories slipping away like sand through fingers. One line made her close the book immediately. "The day I stopped questioning, I started smiling like them." Later that day, she visited the beach again. The same people were in the same spots, the same old man feeding fish by the dock, the same childless couple sipping tea at a weather-worn table, the same music playing softly from unseen speakers. But this time, Leah noticed something else. When she glanced back at the shore from the waterline, the town seemed to shimmer slightly, like it were a mirage. And the horizon. It was empty. No boats. No passing ferries. No noise from the outside world. As the sun dipped below the water in that surreal slow-motion way it always seemed to in A.O. Chem, Leah felt it again, unease growing underneath all the beauty. That night, she dreamt of herself walking into the jungle and burying a suitcase beneath a banyan tree. When she woke, her duffel bag was unzipped, even though she'd locked it. The red flower Mei Li had given her was now pressed flat between the pages of Echoes of the Shore. And something had been added to the back of the book in Leah's own handwriting: "Do not stay past the third moon." The third morning came with an eerie silence. No distant chanting, no clinking dishes from Mei Li's kitchen, not even the usual ocean breeze whispering through the guesthouse shutters. Leah awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, her shirt clinging to her back like a second skin. In the haze of her dream, she'd seen herself kneeling before a moss-covered altar deep in the jungle, whispering a name she didn't recognize. When she sat up, the red flower from the previous night was now blackened and brittle, crumbling between her fingers like ash. That day, as if drawn by a force she couldn't explain, Leah wandered beyond the usual paths and souvenir stalls, past the edges of A.O. Chem where the jungle thickened and a faint trail wound up the cliffs. Multiple locals had warned her, half joking, half serious, not to follow the cliff trail beyond the mangroves. "Old spirits," Mei Li had said. "Bad for dreaming." But something about the way the warnings were given, gentle, rehearsed, like lines from a play, only deepened her curiosity. So Leah packed a bottle of water, her camera, and the journal, and stepped into the green cathedral of vines and silence. The path was barely visible, as if it were a memory more than a road. Thorny roots snagged her ankles, and the cries of birds high above seemed muffled, as if the air itself were thicker. About an hour into the hike, she found the first of the markers. Tall wooden poles etched with worn symbols, wrapped in fabric faded to the color of dried blood. Each one buzzed faintly, not with sound, but with presence. The further she climbed, the more she felt time shift. Her watch had stopped ticking, and the sunlight no longer moved in any discernible arc. At the summit of the trail, nestled in a thicket of banyan trees, she stumbled upon the structure from her dream. It wasn't a temple, not exactly. It looked older, rawer. A stone platform half swallowed by vines, surrounded by piles of offerings. Carved figurines, strands of hair, photographs turned to mush from humidity. A large circular symbol had been painted onto the stone, and at its center was a deep, round pit. The air above it shimmered like heat off pavement. As Leah approached, her ears began to ring. The closer she stepped, the more her thoughts scattered, memories leaking from her mind like sand through open fingers. She remembered her mother's voice, then lost it. She remembered the name of her first love, and then it vanished. Her hands shook as she snapped a photo. But when she checked the screen, the image showed only static. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind her. Leah spun around. No animals. No footsteps. Only silence, and then the faint sound of humming, the same hum from her dream. As she backed away from the structure, the wind shifted, and she swore she heard a voice whisper, 3 moons. The hike back was a blur. The path was no longer where she thought it would be, and trees that had been landmarks now looked unfamiliar. She stumbled twice, once badly enough to scrape her palm and leave a blood trail on the fern-covered floor. When she finally returned to town, the sun was lower than expected, casting an amber glow on the buildings. But something was off. The town looked the same, but the air was heavier, the light wrong, like a painting copied imperfectly. And the people. They no longer waved. They just watched. That night, Leah tried to upload her corrupted photo files to her laptop, only to find that her device no longer recognized them as images. Every file was named Return. In capital letters. Every timestamp read midnight. She searched for someone, anyone, she could trust. Gregory's smoothie stall was shuttered. Elena's yoga mat had been rolled up and abandoned. At the bookstore, Max sat alone, staring at a blank wall, rocking slowly. When she asked where Iris was, he turned to her with an unfamiliar look of dread. "Gone Cliff Way," he whispered. "Didn't come back same." Leah ran home to Maylee's, but the guest house was dark. Her room had been cleaned top to bottom, and her belongings rearranged. The book. Gone. In its place on her bed was a single page torn from it. Written in her own handwriting was a warning she didn't remember writing. "You walked the trail. They see you now." She didn't sleep. That night, outside her window, the ocean was no longer calm. It churned silently, angrily, without a single wave crashing. Lanterns floated across the black surface like eyes watching from afar. A shadow stood at the edge of the beach, unmoving, arms at its sides, facing the sea. Leah shut her window and backed away. And yet the next morning, everything returned to normal. People smiled again, Gregory waved as if nothing had happened, Maylee served her breakfast like every other day. But Leah no longer trusted the smiles. She no longer trusted the food. And worst of all, she no longer trusted her own memories. She opened her camera one last time, praying for any proof of what she'd seen. Only one file remained. A video. She hit play. The screen showed her walking up the cliff trail, her back to the camera, except she'd been alone. And a voice, barely audible under the rustling trees, whispered again, "You have until the 3rd moon." The next morning, Leah rose with the urgent conviction that she needed to leave. No more exploring, no more deciphering dreams or asking questions that only led to more unease. She packed quickly, too quickly, her hands trembling as she shoved her journal, camera, and passport into her duffel. The page with her own handwriting, the warning she couldn't remember writing, was crumpled at the bottom, but she took it anyway. Downstairs, Maylee was already waiting at the table, smiling with the same unbothered warmth, slicing fruit with mechanical grace. "Leaving already?" she asked without looking up. Leah forced a polite smile. "Just want to visit another town," she lied. "I might come back." Maylee simply nodded, but her voice lowered as she added, "You always do." The way she said it, soft, certain, with the weight of countless repetitions, made the hairs on Leah's arms rise. She slung the duffel over her shoulder and made for the pier. At the docks, the ocean stretched endlessly blue, a perfect horizon unmarred by a single ship. The old ferry that had brought her was gone. In its place stood a teenager in a brown uniform who shook his head when she asked for passage out. "No boat today," he said. "Maybe tomorrow. Weather strange." Leah pointed to the clear skies, but he just shrugged and repeated, "Strange." She turned to the other foreign residents milling near the waterfront, all seeming relaxed, as if no one had ever needed to leave. "How do you get out of here?" she asked a young man who looked like a backpacker. He blinked slowly. "Why would you want to?" She pushed past him, headed to the town's only convenience store to buy a phone card, only to find her phone now refused to boot. The startup screen glitched endlessly, resetting over and over again like a clock stuck at midnight. She asked to use the shopkeeper's landline, But he replied with a too perfect smile, "We don't have service for outside. We don't need to call out. Everything here." She felt like she was unraveling, thread by thread. She returned to the guest house, hoping to find another way to access the internet. Perhaps someone else had working data. But when she got there, her laptop was missing from the room. Not stolen, no signs of forced entry, just gone. In its place was an envelope addressed to her in elegant calligraphy. Inside was a note that read, "You are remembered." She stormed out and headed toward the police station. If there was any official force in town, surely they could help her arrange travel. The building sat at the far end of the main road, small, neat, and colonial-looking. Inside, the walls were covered in smiling photos of town festivals and celebrations, but no police emblems, no procedural posters, no certifications. Just images of joy. A single officer greeted her with a bright grin. His badge was blank. His eyes too still. "I want to report a theft," Leah began. "And I need help arranging a boat out of here." The officer walked slowly around the desk and handed her a glass of water instead. "You are very tired," he said gently. "It's the adjustment period. The more you resist, the harder it is." Leah's face flushed with panic. "Adjustment to what?" she demanded. "You think I don't see what's happening here? My things are missing. No one's allowed to leave. What is this place?" The officer only smiled wider. "It's home now." He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a small wooden box, opening it to reveal dozens of passports, American, European, Australian. He held hers up between two fingers, already tagged with a label that read, "Leah, ongoing." She lunged to grab it, but he closed the box and locked it in one motion. "They all asked at first," he said, almost wistfully. "You'll forget soon enough. Everyone does." He led her to the door with an eerie tenderness, placing a hand on her shoulder like a father comforting a child. "There is nothing outside you need. Everything is here." Leah stumbled back to the main square, dazed, heart pounding, the world shifting under her feet. She couldn't remember the last day she'd eaten without Mei Li handing her the plate. She couldn't remember the taste of anything from before the trip. Had she even booked this trip herself? She pulled out her journal, once full of notes, ideas, and daily reflections, and found pages missing. Whole sections torn out. The few that remained had her handwriting, but none of the entries were familiar. Some weren't even written in English. One had only a single phrase scribbled again and again, "They see what you forget." That night, she refused to eat. She locked her door, pushed a table against it, and turned on the camera, filming herself, just to keep proof that she was still aware. Just to see her own face. But when she reviewed the footage an hour later, her image was frozen, unmoving. Only the background showed signs of life. Her curtains fluttered, the candle flickered. But she sat statue still in the footage, eyes unblinking, lips slightly parted, like a marionette waiting for command. Panicked, she raced outside under the veil of darkness. The streets were empty, but not dead. Laughter drifted faintly in the wind, though she saw no one. The lanterns were lit, casting golden shadows on the sand. She ran toward the jungle, toward the cliff trail, thinking it might lead to the other side of the island, to a road, to something. But a row of fresh stones blocked the trailhead now, marked with new symbols, symbols she'd seen in her dreams. And standing beside them, as if expecting her, was Mei Li. She wore the same red shawl, but now her expression was hollow, eyes glazed with a kind of mournful knowing. "You shouldn't fight so hard," she said softly. "This place gives peace. You came for that, didn't you?" Leah backed away, but her feet sank deeper into the soft sand, as if the island itself resisted her flight. "Why me?" she asked, voice cracking. Mei Li looked up at the moon, full and still. "Because you remembered too much." The sun rose on the day of the Festival of Return with unsettling precision, as if pulled into place by invisible strings. Everything in Ao Kem gleamed with manic preparation. Bamboo poles were decorated with vivid cloth streamers, the streets dusted clean with palm fronds, and fresh flowers bloomed in synchronized clusters along the edge of the main square. Leah watched from her balcony, hollow-eyed and tense, clutching the worn page with the phrase, "They see what you forget." The entire village seemed to move in harmony, like dancers choreographed by something older than culture. Mei Li had left a silk dress on Leah's door handle, crimson and gold, embroidered with motifs she now recognized from the jungle ruins. It wasn't a gift. It was a uniform. She didn't wear it. Instead, she dressed in black, tied her hair back, stuffed the note, camera, and journal into her bag, and left the guest house just as the first drumbeats echoed through the valley. The square was unrecognizable. It was no longer a sleepy plaza but a theater of spectacle. Long banquet tables overflowing with colorful dishes, dancers twirling with exaggerated joy, and children dressed in ceremonial masks depicting animals, spirits, and things without names. Leah scanned the crowd and felt her skin crawl. Every foreigner she'd met was present, wearing the same silk garments, faces relaxed and dreamy, like the edge of a sleeping pill's pull. Gregory offered her a goblet of something thick and red. "Drink helps you stay," he murmured. "It's easier that way." She refused. He didn't press. The drumming intensified as the sun dipped low, casting molten orange across the sea, and then the chanting began, low and guttural, harmonizing with the rhythm of the waves. A massive effigy was carried into the square, crafted of driftwood and bone, its shape vaguely humanoid with too many arms. It bore a face that looked eerily like hers. Leah stepped backward, shaken, but the crowd formed a ring around the effigy, arms linked, swaying as though summoned by sound alone. Mei Li approached, flanked by robed elders with bone-white paint streaked across their faces. She held out a bundle of folded parchment. "Your story," she said gently. "You don't need to carry it anymore. Let the fire take it." Leah stared at the offering. The journal. Somehow, it had returned to Mei Li's hands. She reached for it, but stopped. A new voice had joined the chanting. It was hers. Her own voice, low and whispering, threaded into the chorus like a forgotten memory waking up. She turned, searching, heart pounding. That's when she saw it, Elena, the yoga instructor, standing by the water, holding a lantern in one hand and a scrap of paper in the other. Leah rushed to her, weaving through the dancers, nearly tripping over a coil of incense. Elena's face was different now, tense, aware. Her eyes flickered toward the cliffs. "You haven't fully forgotten yet," she said. "Neither did I. But we're running out of time." From her sleeve, Elena slipped Leah a small slip of paper. The handwriting was foreign but precise. "If you remember who you are, they can't keep you." Elena's lips didn't move as she added, "Tonight, after the final lantern. Come to the banyan grove. But only if you want to leave everything behind." Leah clutched the message and nodded. She didn't trust Elena, but she had no other ally. As the sun vanished, the townspeople carried the massive effigy toward the sea, placing it on a raft made of coral white wood. One by one, robed figures placed bundles, some of hair, others of worn clothing, others of paper, beneath the effigy's feet. Mei Li handed Leah a match. "This is the return," she said softly. "Memory becomes peace." Leah stared at the flame, unsure if her hand trembled from fear or defiance. She dropped the match. The effigy ignited, a wave of heat and scent, sandalwood, jasmine, smoke, rolling through the crowd. Cheers erupted. Lanterns were released into the sky. And Leah's heartbeat became the loudest thing in her world. As the town watched the floating inferno drift toward the horizon, Leah backed away. No one noticed. They were too deep in the ritual, too entranced by the symbolism, the illusion of letting go. She took a side path along the edge of the cliffs, where the jungle met the sand, and ducked behind a hut until the crowd's noise was a murmur. The path to the banyan grove was darker than she remembered. The symbols etched in stone now pulsed faintly. She reached the grove, where vines hung like veils, and found Elena already waiting, barefoot, holding a rusted metal box. "This place isn't a town," she said, voice raw. "It's a net. And we're caught in it." Leah's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Elena opened the box. Inside were dozens of IDs, passports, and Polaroid photos. People Leah had never seen, and a few she had. All stamped with the same faded mark, a spiral enclosing a single eye. "This isn't folklore. It's preservation. The town takes the lost, the broken, the unmoored. And it doesn't let go. You become part of the rhythm. If you remember your name too long, it becomes dangerous. Leah leafed through the box, eyes scanning faces. Then she froze. Her own photo was there. But younger. Different haircut. A name she hadn't used in 10 years. Underneath it, another paper. A boarding pass, her real destination before booking AO Chem. Bali. She staggered backward. Breath knocked from her lungs. I didn't choose this town, she whispered. Elena nodded solemnly. Few do. They buried the box beneath a mound of stones as the final lanterns began to dim, and the wind from the sea turned colder. Tomorrow, Elena said, they'll notice you weren't in the final circle. You'll have one chance to escape. You need to be ready before they see you again. Leah stared into the darkness between the trees. And if I'm not? Elena's expression hardened. Then you stay. And by the next festival, you won't remember ever wanting to leave. The morning after the festival was hushed and grey, cloaked in an unnatural fog that rolled in from the sea and curled between the narrow alleyways of AO Chem like fingers searching for something. Leah stood at her window, eyes bloodshot and restless, watching shadows move behind the mist. Below, the townspeople moved slowly, wordlessly, carrying out routines that felt less like living and more like performing. Sweeping steps that didn't need cleaning, lighting incense in places no one passed. Their smiles were still intact, but hollow now, drained of the strange joy that had once masked their menace. Elena had vanished. Her hut by the rocks was empty, the door swinging gently in the wind. Leah checked the banyan grove before dawn. No sign of her, only a freshly disturbed patch of earth where they'd buried the box of names. She knew what that meant. The town had seen her absence from the circle. Elena had been taken. Or silenced. Or worse. Leah made her way to the cliff trail one final time, but the entrance was sealed by a new gate carved from teak and bone, marked with fresh blood-red paint. The symbols shimmered when she approached, triggering a nausea that forced her to stagger backward. They weren't just warnings, they were barriers. Spiritual firewalls. She pivoted, racing back through the trees to her room, her mind pulsing with panic. She had one option left, the sea. Every instinct screamed it was suicide. No boat, no signal, no guarantee the ocean even led anywhere real, but it was the only exit the town hadn't yet closed with smiles and ritual. She tore the sheets from her bed, tied them into a rope, and packed her journal, Elena's note, and the boarding pass in a watertight pouch she fastened around her waist. Outside, Mei Li stood silently by the garden, slicing fruit again with that same curved blade, only now her smile had faded, replaced by something grim and expectant. The forgetting is almost done, she said without turning around. You should rest. Let it happen gently. Leah didn't reply. She just walked. At the beach, the last lantern from the night before still floated in the shallows, flickering dimly, its waxy light barely cutting through the fog. Leah moved toward the old boathouse, a decrepit structure hidden behind a curtain of vines near the rocks. Inside, she found what she'd hoped for, a weather-worn kayak, cracked but intact, covered in a canvas sheet and long-forgotten tools. She pulled it free, heart hammering, every breath a countdown. As she dragged the vessel across the sand, a sudden wave of silence hit the village behind her. No footsteps. No voices. The fog parted. And the people of AO Chem were there, hundreds of them, standing at the edge of the square, barefoot, still. Mei Li was among them, her red shawl billowing in the rising wind. She didn't yell. She didn't run. She just said, "Come back. You're almost safe." Leah didn't stop. She shoved the kayak into the water and climbed in, ignoring the sharp slice of wood against her shin, the salt that stung instantly. As she began to paddle, the current resisted like molasses, but she forced the kayak forward, inch by inch, away from shore. Then came the sound. The humming. Low, rising, layered. It came from the town, from the trees, from the sea itself. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with movement, shapes above, circling like vultures, though no wings beat. Her head ached. Her arms felt heavy. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the journal, flipping frantically until she found the torn page with her name, her real name. She screamed it into the wind. Leah Grace Monroe. I remember. The humming faltered. The kayak surged forward. But the sea began to shimmer like the air above a mirage. The water was no longer behaving like water. It pulsed. Reacted. From the shore, Mei Li raised her arms. Behind her, the villagers stepped forward, still smiling, entering the waves in unison. Their feet didn't disturb the surface. They simply glided. Leah felt something grip her ankle beneath the boat. She kicked, screamed again, this time naming her mother, her brother, her home. I remember everything. The grip loosened. The lantern extinguished. And the water stilled. She awoke on another shore. Days later, or hours, she couldn't tell. A fisherman found her drifting along the edge of Koh Lanta, barely conscious, lips cracked, arms covered in bruises shaped like handprints. In her pouch was the boarding pass, now half faded. Her journal was soaked, the ink run, except for one dry page pressed against her skin. It bore the message, "You broke rhythm. But rhythm waits." The local authorities couldn't find Ao Kem on any map. Locals shrugged when asked. Old village, long gone, one said. Sank in tsunami maybe. Or never existed. You dreamed. Leah didn't argue. She stayed silent as they treated her wounds and offered her tea. That night, in the hospital bed, she dreamed of Mei Li again. Only this time, it wasn't in Ao Kem. It was in Bangkok. She stood at a flower stall, smiling at a tourist who looked familiar. She handed her a red bloom and said, "For dreams." Leah jolted awake. Her pulse racing. Months passed. She returned home, tried to rebuild. But things didn't settle. Her phone would glitch at midnight and show static that hummed. Her reflection in mirrors lingered a beat too long. She'd hear chanting in white noise, find sand in her shoes without explanation, and dream of the cliff trail almost every full moon. And once, at the edge of a market in a new city, she saw a man who looked exactly like Gregory. Same weathered skin, same lazy smile, sipping a smoothie and watching her too intently. She turned away. But the next time she looked, he was gone. She now keeps the faded boarding pass tucked into a locked drawer, next to the only page left from her journal. And every year, on the anniversary of the festival, she dreams of the sea lanterns floating toward her across a beach that no one else remembers. The town didn't take her. But it's waiting.